Hi, I'm Kathy. I've been recording a series of videos on identity. It's partly been prompted by having a CBC first person account published recently on the role of finding out I was adopted in my mid 40s, that the impact that that has had or influence that that has had on my sense of identity, in some ways minimal, and in other ways it opened up a whole other sense of knowing and lineage that matters. It matters. I recorded a video on that. I recorded one on lineage, DNA, and chosen family lineage. I've recorded another one on the roles that we take on, or some that are assigned to us, and the impact that that has on our identity. And in this video, I'm going to focus a little bit on place or geography. In the work that Jerry and I do around worldviews and worldview intelligence, Jerry's my partner, as many of you already know. We talk about the fact that where we grew up and where we live has an influence on shaping our worldviews. And I've mentioned that worldviews are very closely associated with our sense of identity. And that is part of what sparked my thinking about how where we grew up and where we live influences how we see and experience the world, or how we see and experience ourselves in the world. I grew up in Lunenburg, and when I tell people that I grew up there, everyone goes, "Oh, it's such a beautiful town." And it is. You know, it really is. Some decades ago, it was recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. My mother always used to say that between May and October, the town did not belong to the people who lived there, it belonged to the tourists. When I grew up there, it was a fishing town, and the local fishing industry and shipping industry shaped a huge part of the identity of the town. And when I think about Lunenburg, still my sense of identity derives from when it was a fishing town. And it also derives from the fact that my father always had a boat, and we spent a lot of our summer weekends out on the boat and in that community of people who also had boats, friends of my family. And that, even though I don't own a boat and I'm not out on the water very much, it's still very much a part of the sense of who I am, who who I was as I was growing up. And my brother and I will occasionally talk about that, and what all that means for us. For my dad, he came from Quebec, and his one of his family businesses was all around shipping and other forms of industry on the water through big ships. And I've always thought and said that the sea was in my father's blood, very much part of his identity and his sense of who he was. And also the fact that he grew up in Quebec on the Gaspé coast. That was also part of his identity. And even though it's not part of where I grew up, we did spend summers there. And through his lineage, that's also part of my sense of self. On my mother's side of the family, my grandmother, she grew up in Corner Brook, Newfoundland. And I've been there, but I've not spent substantive amounts of time there. But I still feel the influence of her lineage on my sense of self. It's almost like there are invisible threads or something that go out and trace lineage back to places and times. So they gives me a more comprehensive sense of self in an odd sort of way. I don't really know how to describe that. Then Yeah, I think about my partner, Jerry, and he grew up in North Dakota and lives in Minnesota and has for a good chunk of his life. He often refers to himself as a flatlander because it's very flat out there, especially compared to here. And he also, for him, he doesn't like edges. And this is all part of his sense of self and his identity. And so we have Flatlander meets East Coaster. See in my blood a little bit too, not as much as in my dad's. And when we walk in the world, wherever we go, we walk with this sense of heritage from where we grew up and where we live now. And I'm a person who was born in Nova Scotia. I've lived here all my life and very much have an identity connected to Nova Scotia and then to the larger identity of Canada. And over the last few years since COVID and now with chaos and uncertainty originating out of the US, and having been in a life partnership with Jerry for the well over a decade now, the sense of identity associated with being Canadian or being American becomes very clear. And the differences between the two have been illuminated in a way I never really thought about 20 years ago, for instance. And very much a part of identity. People ask sometimes, not so much anymore, if Jerry and I would end up living together. But aside from the fact that he lives close to his kids and grandkids, and I live close to my kids and grandkids, I've never imagined the possibility of living in the US. And I don't think he's ever imagined the possibility of living in Canada, because as important as our relationship is, there are other influences as well. Sense of place, sense of heritage, sense of lineage. So I think about place as helping to shape and define us, usually without our conscious awareness that this is happening. And as with anything, it's always useful to understand who we are, and where we are or where we're from is very much a part of that as well. So as you think about where you live or where you're drawn to, where you grew up, I just issue a bit of an invitation to reflect on how that has contributed to you being the person you are now, to your sense of identity. And what about that is important to you? And what about that maybe doesn't have as much influence as it might? A little bit of reflection on, why it matters. I'd be curious to hear any of your reflections. Thanks for watching the video. I'll see you next time.